Putri Natasya from Group 3 will presenting you the material about psycholinguistic units. The linguistic is relatively fortunate position as compared with other social scientists in being able to analyze his raw data, these sound materials that constitute spoke messages into distinct units. Virtually all schools of linguistics are in agreement as to the two fundamental building blocks of the natural languages, the phoneme and morpheme about lesser as well as more comprehensive units, the distinct feature at end of the spectrum, the constructive features at the other. There is far less agreement and indeed much controversy. In early days of modern linguistics, much was written about the psychological reality of the phoneme. Much of this was poorly speculated, evident futility of which led to abandonment of this problem in favor of purely descriptive investigation. Now, in the framework of psycholinguistics, it seems worthwhile to repaint the equation in atmosphere of frank experimentism. The first question we ask is a strictly psychological one. What are the mechanisms of unit formation in both perceiving and behaving? The second question we ask is whether the basic units which is the linguist operate are merely his confident and productive function or perhaps also have their psychological correlates. Whether the answer may turn out to be here, we continue to seek the answer to a third question. Psychological base of units formation. Psychologists differ widely among themselves in their conception of units. That psychology as a science has prospered without resolution of this problem, whereas linguistics give priority to definition of units, probably reflect on the input side of the equation. Gestalt psycholinguistics have been most active in concern about units. Gestalt psychology developed out of perception studies and derives its principle from this area. The notion of patterning or structure of stimuli is treated as given, based on the postulate dynamic properties of the field distribution of physical stimuli on receptor and this isomorphic relation of this psychofield to psychological process. Units are segregated as self-integrated aspects of the environment which stand out as figures on a more and less homogeneous ground. Figures are characterized by shape boundedness, dynamic properties, and constancy. Many of the accepted empirical laws of perspectual organization have resulted from observation under Gestalt impetus. On the output side of the equation, Gestaltists have had little to say. Appropriate behavior is more or less taken for granted, given adequate structuring of the perspectual field. Behavioristics, on the other hand, have been particularly concerned with the output side in the relation to comparative unanalyzed input. They have dealt with the learning of response, the differentiation and discrimination, and their amalgamation into skills. Only recently have behaviorationally stained psycholinguistics begun to give attention to perspective.
Oke, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, I'm Arinda junaidin from class B, and my registration number is A1M219034. Okay, let's do the topic. Phenomena of perceptual organization. It's apparent that for the most part responses are not made to unorganized masses of stimuli or to stimuli in isolation, but rather to patterns or groups of stimuli. This patterning of stimulus input is not detected by physical properties of the stimuli themselves, but is imposed upon physical events by both innate and learned properties of the organism. The general ways in which the organism imposes an order upon the environment can be determined by observation and characteristic phenomena of perceiving. Orthographic patterns can be produced by omission of speech, for example, as a negatory. Next, the topic is constancy and transposition. When a person reacts to an object as the same, despite variations in illumination, in angle of regard, in distance, and so forth, he is showing constancy. Its stimulus patterns is different, but his perceptual response is constant. When a person learns to respond to that one of two objects, which is the brighter, larger, nearer, heavier, and so on, and continues to respond correctly despite what change in the absolute stimulus values, he is displaying transposition. Next, the topic. Some general facts about constancy are the following. Number 1. The use of a reduction screen eliminates the constancy effect. The analogous expectation for speech decoding vault between Alphonse and Almar Pops should tend to sound more and more different as environmental context is reduced. Number 2. What is perfect in experimental conditions is usually a compromise between perfect constancy and absolute stimulus equation. Number 3. The greater the contextual difference between standard and comparison objects, the greater the constancy effect. In speech decoding, this would mean that the greater the difference in phonetic environment, the more similar Alphonse and Almorph shall sound. Number 4. Only object-type stimulus characteristics, for example, surface colors, display constancy. The more meaningful the segments in which speech sounds occur, the greater shall be the constancy effect. Number 5. The more cues available that standard and comparison objects are the same, albeit under different contexts, the greater the constancy. This again implies that constancy effects are stronger under natural conditions. The last, the direction of the constancy effect is typically a regression toward the real object tools. In other words, what is perfect tends to be more like the object as known under normal conditions of inspection, ordinary daylight illumination, normal angle of regard, and inspection distance, etc. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Awalia Rahmawati Ramadhan. My work number is A1M219034. Okay, first I want to explain about phonemic and morphonemic consonants. Following the close analogy between visual and linguistic consonants, one would want to study the perceived similarities of allophones and allomorphs under varying degrees of linguistic context, complex, meaningful utterances, single meaningful words, conditioning phonetic environments, and isolate speech sound. Material is study of perceptual grouping in language decoding. At an earlier point in this section, it was suggested that ambiguous spoken or written materials, the format produced by dialing between word junctures by tape cutting, and the latter of omission of between word space, could be used to study spontaneous grouping tendencies if subjects were given a sample of such material and instructed to segment it. The relative strengths of alternative grouping tendencies should appear in the frequencies of common cutting points. The next material is study of communication units. It might be appropriate to begin with an approximation to the normal linguistic situation, face-to-face conversations between two speakers of a language. The grossest unit of language perception would seem to be the shortest consecutive sequence of speech produced by one individual to which another can make a discriminative response. The next material is unit formation in behaving encoding. First, vocalic skill components. Number 1, the starting point is repetition of a regular sequence of motor responses on the basis of directs, international encoding, imitation of adult model, or some other basis. Number 2, signs under the conditions its movements produce perceptive self, simulation, feedback, which can become conditioned to the succeeding movement. Number 3, once a sequence of movements is being existed repeatedly on a perceptive feedback basis, the time intervals between successive reactions are short enough to permit the formation of central, presumably in the motor context, among the neutral events that are the necessary attendants of this movement. Next is vocalic scale sequence, the model in which perceptive and auditory feedback is a controlling factor in skill existing and probably preserved in the more loosely willed vocalic skin sequence, the sequence of syllables that constitute word and tried phrases. I think enough. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Cahya Prawati. In this video, I will explain the material about psycholinguistic units. So, in this video, there are 4 topics that I will explain. The first topic is unit formation in behaving. In this topic, I will continue the material that has been described by my friend about 3 points of unit formation in behaving, some research proposal. The second topic is relation between psycholinguistic and linguistic. The last topic is psychological reality of linguistic units. The first material is unit formation in behaving, some research proposal. Number of research proposals related to units in encoding are included in sections 5 on transitional psycholinguistics. Certain general possibilities may be suggested here. So the first is detailed latency measurement. Modern instruments make it feasible to analyze juncture and pausal phenomena high close detail. Second is delayed auditory feedback. Given measurements of transitional probabilities in English, particularly has between syllables, the delayed feedback technique could be employed to check the prediction that weaker links in the coding chain. The third is slowed speech. A similarly detailed analysis should be made of intentionally slowed speech on the part of native speakers. The fourth is interruption technique. If a spontaneously encoding speaker or a reader is interrupted at unpredictable intervals by some ingenious technique not specified at present. And the last is backward working skill modification. Probably one of the best indices of encoding units is the existence of backward working, for example, anticipatory skill modification. The second material is relation between psycholinguistic and linguistic. The first is the problem. The problem by application of the logically rigorous methods described earlier. The linguist has been able to determine minimal units on each of the levels into which language is usually divided. The unit on the phonological level is the phoneme. The unit on the morphological level is the morpheme. And most linguists would probably admit the validity of the class as a meaningful and useful unit at the syntactical level. Second is linguistic feasibility of psychological units. The linguist, where the syllable, word, and sentence are functional concepts to the native speaker of a language, has felt obligated to define them rigorously, but he has met with little success. The first is he has been reasonably successful in incorporating the concept of the syllable into his description, but only for some languages. Second is the word has met with even less success. Some linguists maintain the position that defining the word is a pseudo-problem, that there is no unit in language which correlates with the traditional unit we call a word. The last is the sentence likewise was not being clearly defined in linguistics. The most meaningful definitions have been in terms of intonation, features, and juncture phenomena. The last material is psychological reality of linguistic units. We come now to the reverse problem of determining whether the units which the linguist can isolate are psychologically valid. First is the phoneme is probably the one unit which can be demonstrated to exist both linguistically and psychologically. Second is there is evidence for the justification of larger units as well, just as allophones are encoded and decoded automatically. Automorphs may be selected automatically, indicating the same process on the morphological level. And the last is on the syntactic level. The category of agreement indicates selection of word groups. A Spanish speaker who begins a phrase with the feminine article la indicates by this choice that he has already selected a feminine noun, so that on the syntactical level, perhaps the whole noun phrase is a unit in encoding. So, that's all for me. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ega Setyawati. I will explain about psycholinguistic unit. Result proposal. Results should be directed at setting up situation designed to yield head-pendant result, which can then be compared with the two sets of units described above. It may develop, for example, that on the phonological level, both the syllable and the phoneme are valid. Child language. One field for such investigation might be in child language. The other two, which distinction and contrast are made, should be carefully analyzed. For example, if it turned out that a child learned a series of monosyllabic items, no two of which form a minimal contrast. For example, if when a child learned the word pa, he did not then learn ma, but first learn me. Revert speech. Another possible technique may be the use of revert speech in a controlled experimental situation. Purpose would be to ascertain those points where mistakes are made, the hypothesis being that from this point some indication may be had of the units into which the speaker devises speech. The word as a linguistic. The word as unit occupy a paradoxical situation in present-day linguistic science. Such a unit, roughly coinciding with the usage of the term high everyday language and in the discourse of science other than linguistic, is actually employed as a fundamental dividing line between the two levels of morphological or infra-word construction and syntactic or supra-word construction. Criteria for word units. Before proceeding with the definition to be proposed, we must ask what requirements must be fulfilled by a definition for it to be considered satisfactory. The popular conception of the word as indicated by the use of space in orthographies of various languages is not in itself sufficiently consistent to make a definition possible which will justify every word division in every ascending orthography. Overview of this analysis. To aid in clarify procedure which must otherwise seem obscure at many points without some knowledge of the end result and the major difficulties to be overcome. An informal account of the nature of the solution at template here will first be given. The continually or not interruptibility of the word has been mentioned above as desideratum of successful definition. I think just enough for me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Fita Sarinawati, Stambuk A1M219034. I will continue the presentation of my friend Ega Setyawati. Okay, I will presentation about definition and clarification of terms and some psycholinguistic implication. Next. Definition and clarification of terms. The first unit to be considered is the morph order subsystem class or MSC, in terms of which it will be possible to define the class unit referred to above.
A MORP 68 Psycholinguistic, a survey of theory and research problems. Subsection class is a set of single morphs which in a given context might substitute for each. Next. For example, in the sentence the singer broke the construct, the morph sing in singer belongs to an MAC which contains sings, play, meet, and other members. Since the player broke the construct and the manner broke the construct are possible utterances, reform does not belong to the class since reform consists of two morphs. Next. Some psycholinguistic implication. The concept of nil as defined here is essentially a unit of which there is always a single fixed number in the class of words which are mutually substitutable in the same construction, such it corresponds to the notion of position in the word as developed by both in connection with the description of American Indian language. It might find application beyond that of it will be investigated psychological as a possible fundamental encoding or decoding unit. Next, hierarchies of psycholinguistic ZMFE. The various research techniques for getting at psycholinguistic units suggest both here and elsewhere for a number of different types of units. The latter, which include clusters of the smaller, in the same way the function classes include morphs and morphemes include monoms, but they will also overlap to varying degrees in all probability. Next, what's going on in the rapid interplay of conversion between an encoder and decoder must be tremendously complicated, since it involves operation on all these levels simultaneously and in relation to all others of these types of units and their distinguishing features. In the process of encoding, for example, a speaker might be motivated toward obtaining some butter for his bread, which influences his selection of command. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.